All right, we're making a lot of progress here. The next hormone, or I should say the next gland, is the adrenal glands and the kidney. And again, this is just another process that we've talked about before. This is part of handout 14B at the beginning of this chapter. But we need to talk about cortisol and corticosterone. So remember, our hypothalamus is going to produce this releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone. It's going to flow down to the anterior pituitary. It's going to produce adrenocorticotropic hormone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone is going to go into our bloodstream, and we're going to flow down to the adrenal glands. Now, the part of the adrenal gland that is affected by the adrenocorticotropic hormone is the adrenal cortex. And remember that adrenocorticotropic hormone is going to tell the adrenal cortex to produce cortisol and corticosterone. Cortisol and corticosterone target all the cells of our body, and they decrease inflammation. That word says inflammation. It's kind of hard to see. Which, remember, is what's caused when we have an injury. So cortisol and corticosterone decreases inflammation, so we don't have too much inflammation. We also, remember, metabolize fats with cortisol and corticosterone. It's released a lot of times under a high stress situation. In fact, cortisol and corticosterone are often referred to as the stress hormone, because when we are super stressed out, we're going to be releasing cortisol and corticosterone to deal with the stress. Now, when we were hunter and gatherers and trying to dodge saber-toothed tigers and that kind of thing, this really helped us because it would help process fat and get our blood sugar levels higher to become very aware of our surroundings. But in this day and age, we don't have saber-toothed tigers to worry about. So this can mess with our appetite. So a lot of times people, it's like one of two things with people that are stressed. You can either have no appetite because of the production of cortisol and corticosterone, or you want to eat everything in sight if you're really stressed out. So a lot of people actually gain weight because of cortisol and corticosterone, because they are producing it, and it's triggering the hunger reflex. We eat when we don't really need to and that kind of thing when we're stressed out. Now, the adrenocorticotropic hormone also tells our adrenal cortex to produce the hormone aldosterone. And remember, aldosterone is going to target our kidney, and aldosterone is something we talked about in first semester as well, but it regulates sodium and potassium ion levels and blood pressure. So what it does, it will tell our kidneys to pee out excess sodium. Or absorb excess sodium. It'll tell us to pee out excess potassium, and it'll tell us to retain water, kind of like antidiuretic hormone, so that we raise our blood pressure. And so aldosterone is an important hormone for regulation of blood pressure. We have to maintain a certain amount of blood pressure. Now, the adrenal cortex also produces male sex hormones, androgens. We could just call it testosterone. Androgens are kind of a more generic term for testosterone, but androgens are testosterone and testosterone's derivatives, so like slight variations of the testosterone. So just think of what testosterone does with androgens. It targets things like hair growth, muscle growth, bone growth, those kind of things. It also gives males their secondary sex characteristics, right? So I just wrote male sex hormones. So we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into the lab class. We'll be looking at the adrenal glands, and we'll be looking at the adrenal cortex, and you'll see the area of the adrenal cortex where androgens are made. Remember, I told you also last semester that females make estrogen with their ovaries, but they also make testosterone in their adrenal glands. Well, there it is. Your adrenal cortex is making androgens, and this is what helps stimulate girls to grow and produce body hair and that kind of thing. So you just don't have as much androgens as a male, so you don't get as much of that stuff. You don't grow as much hair, and you tend to stop growing your bones sooner and that kind of thing because, we don't have those androgens. Okay, now we have another part of this handout that doesn't involve a hormone. It's a nerve signal from our brain. And this is going to trigger the adrenal medulla. Oh no. Again, we have a cortex and a medulla. So your adrenal gland that sits on your kidney, by the way, has a cortex and a medulla. The cortex produces these hormones, cortisol, corticosterone, aldosterone, androgens. The adrenal medulla is what makes our adrenaline, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. So the adrenal medulla produces epinephrine, norepinephrine. This is not caused by a hormone, right? This is a nerve signal. That's why I have an X here, because there's no hormone stimulation for epinephrine and norepinephrine. It is a nerve response. But epinephrine and norepinephrine, aka adrenaline, targets the heart, blood vessels, trachea, and it regulates both heart rate, so it speeds up our heart, and blood pressure by vasoconstricting things like the blood vessels and the trachea. So epinephrine and norepinephrine are going to be these big regulators. Remember, that's in our video with the poor girl who had anaphylaxis. They gave her epinephrine, EpiPen. They gave her that epinephrine, and what did it do? It vasoconstricted her blood vessels and allowed her to get a appropriate heart rate to get out of that anaphylactic shock. Okay, now the kidney itself, so that those are the adrenal glands. The kidney itself produces several hormones. One of them is erythropoietin. Remember, erythropoietin is the hormone that stimulates red blood cell production in our bone marrow. So remember, the liver had thrombopoietin. Well, the kidneys make erythropoietin. So erythropoietin is going to stimulate red blood cell production. The kidneys also produce this hormone called renin. And renin, if we think back to first semester, we talked about this thing called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone reflex. So what renin does is it activates this secondary hormone called angiotensin, and then angiotensin stimulates or activates, I should say, aldosterone that was made by the adrenal cortex. So renin is going to turn on aldosterone. And then finally, the kidneys produce calcitriol. And if you remember, calcitriol is vitamin D. So our kidneys can secrete and release calcitriol. It targets our intestines to help us absorb calcium. So calcitriol, I think I mentioned this actually a week or so ago, that calcitriol is vitamin D. And so you can't absorb calcium without vitamin D. our kidneys make some of this. Pretty cool. Okay, so that takes care of our adrenal glands and our kidneys.